And now the kind of realization is that we have to help more students get through college and actually finish the journey and actually be ready for the world they're coming into. When I was at the Gates Foundation, the data was pretty clear that getting a post-secondary credential with labor market value is the biggest disintermediator of pathways to poverty, right? It's the way to get people onto pathways to prosperity. But to do that, you've got to get really good at helping students actually finish what they start. And that hasn't been something we've been great at. But now I think there's this driving conversation around that. And why I think the ACRO conversation is so powerful is the two groups that have probably been early in the use of analytics in education are at what I would call the front door, and as they cross the stage and they enter their work life, you see the kind of work in admissions and you see the work in alumni. And all that analytics around getting them in and then getting money from them after they've left. And now it's figuring out how we actually drive the same kind of analytics to getting them to and through the journey. And SEM has been about that for a long time. And Civitas is really about helping stand up a student success platform to help people do that at scale and innovate at scale.
So I want to talk a little bit about data science and ethics this morning. So strategic enrollment management and enrollment managers have been embraced, as we know, by many institutions, despite sometimes having endured criticism, particularly by scholars. Case in point, the late renowned political economic Professor Gordon Winston once admonished in the Chronicle of Higher Education that enrollment managers were ruining higher education. Recently, data scientist Cathy O'Neil released her book, Weapons of Math Destruction, which she describes the dangers of relying on big data analytics to solve problems. The book, which has been received with mixed reviews, points out biases of big data and their human consequences. Some have heralded the book as igniting a thought-provoking look at data analytics. And I thought perhaps this morning we can ignite a discussion and perhaps a debate about how we use data as institutions and what is our responsibility to empower our students with their own data. So let's start a discussion about that. Jump in, either one of you.
Well, I'll say kind of three big things on that. One is there is no doubt that the conversation around data really matters right now, especially when you look at the fact that we're probably in the place where healthcare was in the mid-2000s, when the flood of new technology and new data streams, especially with them it was electronic medical records, created the ability to actually look at lifespans in a whole different way. And that data stream actually pointed out some things that made the medical world take a step back. We actually just wrote a white paper on this called The Healthy Move in Education, which is kind of drawing the parallel. And what they found was that the number 3 killer of people in the United States were medical errors. And the field really had to take a deep breath, and it had to go through kind of a Kubler-Rossian denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance to kind of come to grips with that because they didn't want to believe it. But it turned out to be true, and they found out that if they spent as much time, they were doing all this really powerful work on cancer and heart disease, but actually they can make the same impact by fixing things that could be fixed with simple checklists, right? The checklist manifesto, the idea of washing hands more frequently and actually putting in the central lines the right way. And again, things they didn't want to get their arms around. By the way, we're seeing the same thing in the world of education. The idea that only a little over half of the students that start actually finish their higher education journey. If you're a middle and low income student, you're more likely to leave with debt than a degree. The fact that you look at the difference between the top income quartile with an 85 to 95% completion rate and the bottom income quartile with a 12 to 18% completion rate. And you start getting your arms around the fact that we have a moment where we can get better as well. The challenge is, in the world of education, is our data capacity has been completely overwhelmed with what we like to call accountability analytics, where we're trying to get data in the hands of accreditors and legislators and trustees and administrators. And by the way, if you talk to any of your IR folks, they are wiped out with this. And it's not getting any better because people are so focused on the data. The challenge with that is that work is exhausting and it's prescriptive and it doesn't allow them the time to do the work of actually doing the data science and give them richer information about what works and what doesn't. And they end up, our chief data scientist comes from healthcare, his name is David Kill, and he argues that the world of education seems to be obsessed with autopsy data, right? They're focused on students who are no longer with us. And wouldn't they rather have data during the operation to help the patient? Or better, wouldn't they rather have diagnostic data that helps the patient focus on wellness and not sickness? And I think that's where we are in the world of education. So the first thing is we need to make the shift. The shift from a total focus on accountability analytics to a focus on action analytics, and actually getting data to help the students in the moment, and in particular to focus on not just intervening with at-risk students. That is such a limited frame. We have got to be thinking about how we help all students optimize their education journey. How can we make sure that they're meeting the right people, going to the right co-curricular events, actually maximizing that curricular experience to get there? Because what we're learning is that the majority of the reasons students are leaving aren't academic. They're actually life and logistic and psychosocial and all that kind of work. So that shift is really going to matter. Now, as you make that shift, you got to be careful, because if you haven't read the book, The End of Average, please read it. Todd Rose is a professor at Harvard who makes the case that in these analytics initiatives, the problem is in averagitarianism is a huge problem, because people they smooth out rough edges, and people have jagged edges. They're different. And the problem is you end up making policy, and you've seen this, Bridget, in the work you do. You make policy and you drive practice based on these smooth edge averages, and it's a problem. How many of you know somebody with 2.3 kids? Right? And we do that same thing with our students, where we say that these averages are what matter, and the challenge is we're not personalized. Right? So Amazon would never use averages in the work that they do. They have a personalized model, because that's what optimizes the outcomes. And so part of our challenge is we have to get away from simplistic averagitarianism, and our challenge is we're kind of steeped in those averages because of the reporting we've done, and we're also steeped in demography as destiny problems, where most of our work has been basically regression against demographic variables. And so we're constantly looking at age and gender and part-time, full-time, as opposed to doing the kind of data science work that's much more kind of comprehensive and tells richer stories. And which leads to the third thing, which is, as you do this work, you have to be willing to let go of some of the power that comes with data. And part of letting go means dealing with the ethical challenges of getting the data to the front lines. We've got to get the data in the hands of students, in the hands of faculty, in the hands of advisors, so they can work their art. I would argue that we often treat advisors, and especially faculty members, we infantilize them. We treat them like kids. We say, well, they can't have that data because they'll do bad things. I mean, tell you what, I think most faculty in this country are the equivalent of battlefield surgeons. Highly trained professionals in low information environments that are doing the best they can do in the moment, and they rarely see the outcomes of the work that they do. Right? As opposed to the Division I coaches out there who have complete dossiers on every athlete they're going to work with and have deep instructional plans for how they're going to work with them. Our faculty don't have the same thing. And if we could turn that around and say, we're going to give you deep, rich data and have you tune and test and try the work that you're doing and treat you like professionals, there's not a doctor out there that wouldn't rather have a chart, right, to know if you're allergic to penicillin or whatever it's might be, so I can design that treatment in that way. But also means we've got to get data to the students to have them drive this. Anybody out there who uses Fitbit devices get how addicted you get to feedback that tells you when you're on track or off track. But it does mean, just the final thing, we have to do the design thinking to think about the way you bring data. So we always talk about the 4 rights. You got to build the right infrastructure to get the right data to the right people in the right way. That right way part is an art. You got to figure out the right way, because what really terrifies me, and I'd love, Bridget, to get your sense of this, I just think there are some people in the world of education who should never, ever, ever use analytics.